And then I'm gonna stream my browser again. Okay. And so we're just gonna talk about the basics of P5, and then kind of go from there. So I'm just gonna delete all the code. They usually, when you create a new sketch, they fill in all this code for you, which is really nice. But if you don't know anything about code, you won't understand what it means. So let's go over it from scratch. So before, when we were in the console, we could do things like 2 plus 2, and it would like tell us the answer. But if I try to run this as a sketch, uh, nothing's really going to happen. It's yellow, so it's saying it doesn't really understand what I'm trying to do here. So this is not really a valid expression, even though we were able to do that in the console. When we were typing into the console, what it's actually doing is a shortcut for this thing called console.log. So if I say console.log and then I say 2 plus 2, now I can actually run this program. That's an actual statement. And it tells me in the console down here that that's 4. So working on a program is a little bit different than working on the console. We have to write like a full expression. And so there's a bunch of different ways to do that. Console.log is not really like how you make a program that does stuff. It's just a way to write messages. It's used for the developer to write messages to themselves or other developers. So it's not like production code. It's not something that somebody who's just using the website just to use it will ever see. So we don't really need to use console.log very much, but let's go over what was set up for us um, when we first created the program. So we'll write it from scratch. So the first thing that you saw there was this word called function. And we're going to go over this in a lot more detail in a couple weeks, but a function is essentially like a block of code that does something, and it usually does something that you want to do more than once. So you can think of a function as like a recipe. If you have a really good recipe for like a hamburger or something, you're going to want to hold on to it because you're going to make hamburgers multiple times, and the recipe is always going to stay the same, but you're going to make new hamburgers in the future. So a function is kind of like that. It's just like a series of things that you want the computer to do, and you usually just give it a name. So we start with the word function. In JavaScript, this is called a keyword. A keyword is, let's put a little comment here. So a keyword is something only JavaScript, that only JavaScript can use. Whoops. So like the word function, if we put it in quotation marks, it would be a string, so it wouldn't follow. But in JavaScript, we have these things called keywords, and there's a bunch of them. There's not that many of them, but there's a bunch of them. And that means that only if we write that word, it's only going to be able to do the one thing. So when I say function, that's a keyword, and P5, depending on what your highlighting scheme is, it'll usually make it a different color. So for this scheme, it's yellow. Um, for the light scheme, it's like kind of brown or something. For the dark scheme, it's like orangey yellow. And for the high contrast, it's yellow. So after we create a function, we need to give it a name. So the name for this function is going to be setup. That's something that P5 has built into it. So if you write a setup function, P5 is looking for it, and it's going to set up your sketch. So we just say function setup. Functions always have parentheses at the end of them. So parentheses are the group operators that we used on Monday. It's the 9 and 0 keys on your keyboard, but when you're holding shift. So to create parentheses, I go next to setup and I put a parentheses like that. So a function name always has parentheses after it. Eventually we'll put stuff into those parentheses, but for now, just know that if you see the parentheses, that means it's a function. After that, we put curly brackets. So curly brackets you probably have not seen before, but they're, well, actually, if you've written CSS, you've probably seen them before. So yeah, if you've taken a MMP 100, you've written CSS, you've seen curly brackets. They look the same here, and they mean kind of a similar thing. But the curly brackets are on your keyboard right below where the parentheses are. to the right of the P key usually, and you have to hold Shift to make them. So if I hit those bracket keys without Shift, I get these square brackets, which are also used in code, but not quite yet. So we want to hold Shift and we hit those curly brackets. And P5 and most code editors will, once you put a curly bracket that opens, they'll usually put a curly bracket that closes at the same time. So the weird thing here is I actually just hit an open curly bracket and it made both of them for me. So with code, it kind of knows if I'm opening a curly bracket, I'm almost definitely going to close a curly bracket. So it goes ahead and does it for me. And then that's convenient because I can just hit enter. And that brings me to the next line, which is what I want to do in terms of making my code look good. I've created this function block. So I've said this is this recipe that I want. And now I'm going to write out the steps in the recipe. So normally when you write a recipe, you say like, here are the ingredients. And then you have like a bullet, like, 8 ounces of hamburger meat, and then another bullet, like 1 ounce of ketchup, another bullet. So you have like a list of things. And we want to do the same thing in our function code. We want to go to the next line of our function, and then you can see P5 has already moved my little cursor over. So when I start typing, I'm going to start typing the next function I'm going to write, which is create. It's already indented for me. So this doesn't change my code, but it makes it a lot easier to read. If my line was like right here, it would look like it's all just like one big thing. But if I move it over here, then I can see that I can really easily see that this create line is part of my setup function. P5 also has these little arrows right here where you can collapse your functions. So if you have a lot of code, you can collapse some stuff to make it easier to see everything. So yeah, so P5 will do a lot of that stuff for you. So it takes a while to get used to these conventions. So don't worry if you don't get them exactly right the first time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a canvas. This is pretty much how all P5 uh, programs start. And so I'm going to say create canvas. This is also a function. So I'm going to put parentheses after it. And this one is a little bit different. So I'll talk about the differences in a second. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end. So most statements in code end with a semicolon. It says like, do this thing and then stop, then do the next thing and then stop. And the semicolon is what tells the program to stop. So all of our lines usually have a semicolon after it, unless they're opening a new code block, which is what's happening right here. So then I just put the numbers I want for my width and my height of my canvas. So that's the easiest part. I just put, usually it's 400 by 400, so that's going to make 400 pixels wide, 400 pixels tall. So I'm going to hit play here. Oh, I didn't draw anything on the canvas. So it's there, but we can't see it because my screen is black. So I'm going to draw a background real quick, and then we'll go back to this. Okay, so now you can see the canvas has been created. And if we change these two numbers here, like if I change this to a 6, you'll see that the canvas is much wider. So that's the width of the canvas, or how wide it is. And then if I change this number here, like if I change that to 800, then it gets taller. So I can make the canvas as big as I want for my drawing. So let's go back. Let's do 600 by 400. That's a good size. Um, and so that's essentially, it's using the actual pixels on your screen. That's how many pixels across the screen it is. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between these two functions real quick. So for this function setup, I use the word function and then I say setup. And this is what's called defining a function. So defining a function means I'm saying what the function does. For this function down here, create canvas, this is actually using the function. I'm actually executing the function or telling it to run. And the create canvas function is a function that P5 like does on its own. We don't have to tell it what to do. It makes this little canvas that we can draw on. And so when we define a function, we have to use the keyword, we name the function, and we use the curly brackets, and that says this is what the function does. But when we call a function or use a function, we just use the name of the function. We don't need to use the keyword. and then we just have our parentheses and a semicolon at the end, and the program knows, okay, I'm supposed to run that function. I'm supposed to do whatever that function is. And then for this particular function, create canvas, it takes two numbers, which are called arguments or parameters, and they tell the function how to act. So the first one is that 600, and that's how wide we want it to be. The second one is the 400, that's how tall we want it to be. And they're separated by a comma. So there's only one comma because there's two values. So we start with one value, we have a comma, and then we have another value. Okay, so the next thing that I did here is I made a background. And the background just fills in the background of the canvas with whatever color you tell it to. And I used a number for the color, but let's go ahead and just use a string real quick. So we can use the color white, or I could use the color orange. You can use whatever color you want. Um, and so the background is another function like the create canvas that fills in the background with it, whatever color you want. And you might notice there's a little bit of a difference between these two functions, the way they're named. And that's a convention of JavaScript, and that's called Camel Case. So when we have a function name, so this is Camel Case. If we have a function name that is two words, so it's camel, it's create and canvas. So different programming languages deal with this differently. Sometimes, like Python, will turn this into create underscore canvas. Other programs will do other things. But in JavaScript, what we do is we just capitalize the second word. So that tells us these are two different words. It makes it easier to read. Because if we just wrote create canvas as one long word, it's kind of confusing. By capitalizing this little C right here, that makes it easier to see these are two different words. Background is just actually one word. It means background, so it doesn't have any capitalized letters. So that's called camel case. Okay, so we've created a canvas and we have added a color. The color is orange. We can change that color. Actually, this is a cool thing that the P5 editor has. If I click on this color, I can actually choose different colors in here, and or I can like click on these different colors that it gives me. And if I like one of these better, I can just leave it. Oh, whoops. Maybe I have to hit like enter or something. And so now if I run the program again, now I have that different color. Um, okay. So, but normally if I want to write a color, I can just use like CSS colors. So like orange, blue, light blue, I can use all of the different colors. There's a good website for this, HTML color codes. So this is a really good website for finding colors because you can do the RGB picker and it'll give you the hex value. If you've done CSS, you should know the hex value, but just as a quick reminder, it's like a shorthand for the three red, green, blue color values. But there's also like a list of names. So if I go to HTML color names and I want to find like a specific, let's say I want orange, but I want like a different orange. Here are all the different oranges. I could say like, oh, actually what I want is dark orange. So I could copy this and go back to my P5 sketch and paste it in here, or I could just write it out and run my program again. And now we have dark orange. Okay, so we've got our background. I'm just gonna do a couple more things and then I'll give you guys a minute to play around with what we've got so far. Because I know it's a lot of information. So I'm just going to draw a couple shapes, and that's the kind of the main thing that we are going to be doing in P5 is drawing shapes to make designs and different things. So the first shape I'm going to draw is a circle. So I'm just going to type circle, and the circle basically has three values that we have to give it. It has a position, like where it is in the canvas. So it could be all the way on the left, on the right, somewhere in the middle, and that's the X value. So if you remember in geometry, you have coordinate systems, and we'll go over this in a little more detail next week. But you have coordinate systems, so the X is horizontal, and the y is vertical. And so the first number of a circle is where it is x y's, the second number is where it is y y's, and then the third number is how big it is. So if I want to put my circle directly in the middle, I can say, okay, my canvas is 600 pixels wide, so I'll do 600 divided by 2. And so if I work that out in my head, it's 300. But I can also just do the math directly in here. I could say 600 divided by 2, and then I can do 400 divided by 2. And then for the size, let's make it the same as the canvas. So let's put 400. Okay, so now I have a great big circle in the middle of my canvas. And the thing that's kind of cool about this is that I know it's exactly centered. I know it's exactly the same height because I use the exact same numbers. And I didn't even have to do this math in my head. I just said, I wanted the circle to be in the middle. So if I want something that's in the middle, I take the width of the canvas and just divide it in two, and I get the middle. So I can do that in my head. So I'll just do 200 and 400. So that's a circle. If I want to make the circle smaller, I'll just do like 200. There you go. If I want to move it to the right, I'll make this number bigger. So I do like 400 and it moves to the right. If I want to move it to the left, I'll make it smaller. And eventually, I'm just going to show you guys something really quick. Eventually, we'll make this stuff interactive. So if I put like mouse X here, that's like a variable that uses to track the mouse. And so now, oh wait, I'm not drawing. Whoops. Okay, I'm just going to do something real quick, and then I'll come back to where we were. Okay, so now I can actually move the circle with my mouse. So it's pretty easy to actually get something that's interactive pretty quickly using P5. But I'm skipping a little bit of ahead.
Professor,
Yeah.
um, do you mind changing the color? I just want to see how you change the circle, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, I'll do that in a second. Actually, I'll do that right now. So let's put the circle back where it was. Okay. Well, let me do one more shape and then I'll do colors because we don't have a ton of time left. So another type of shape, and once you start to write code, you're going to wonder how do I do stuff? And the easiest way to find out is to go to help and you go to reference. And so if circle was just the word circle, that was pretty easy. But for a rectangle, if I type in rectangle, there's no function for that. So if I want to look for my shapes, I can go here and go to shape. And here are my 2D primitives. These are all the different shapes I can draw. So that was my circle. If I want to draw a rectangle, this is actually abbreviated rect. And so I can actually go in here and just copy this code. Hold on. What's up? No, this Fitterman is down on Greenwich. This is the main building. I'm teaching a class right now. If you wait like 10 minutes, I can help you. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so I can actually just grab this code right here, and I'm just gonna copy it, and I'm gonna go back here and paste it in. So there's my rectangle. And so now here it is on my screen. And I can go in here and I can look at what does this stuff all mean. So here's the syntax for my rectangle. So this first number is the x, that's the x coordinate. There's the y coordinate. Here's the width. And then when you see brackets like this, that means it's optional. So the width I need for my rectangle, but the height is actually optional. If I want a square, I can just leave out the height. And there's a few other things here to like make rounded corners and stuff, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. So this rectangle is actually a square, so I can just remove that last bit and I still get a rectangle. If I don't have the right number of arguments though, P5 is going to say, that's wrong, you're doing that wrong. So here it says sketch line 11. It'll usually tell me exactly where I got it wrong. Rect was expecting at least 3 arguments, but received only 2. So this is a P5 error. It's a little bit more explanatory than what we get from just regular JavaScript. So that's pretty helpful. So it says line 11, rectangle, 30. So it says it needs 3 arguments, and I only have 2, so I need to add that last size argument. And so there's my rectangle. And same thing here, I can move this around. So if I make this number bigger, if I make it 300, it'll be over there with my circle. If I make the Y bigger, it'll go down with my circle. If I make it even bigger than that, it'll go down farther. So I can move my shapes around. I know we're starting off very simple, but uh, that's kind of, where we have to start. And then Xavier, or sorry, X was asking about the colors. So we'll go into a way more detail, but just to get you guys started, if I want to change the colors, it essentially works the same way as Adobe Illustrator. If you guys used Illustrator at all in MMP 100 or MMA 100, basically you have the fill, which is like the inside color, and then you have the stroke, which is the outline around the shape. Okay, so if I want to change the inside color, I have to use the function fill. And notice I'm putting it before my shapes. I have to set the color before I draw the shape. If I put it after, it'll still draw using the defaults before it actually draws the shape. It changes the color. So let's say I want to change the fill from orange to blue. So now we get the blue fill. And if I'm like, oh, that's too bright, I can click on this and just get like a nicer, lighter value. And whoops, try that again. So that looks a little bit better. And then I can change the outline. So I can say stroke, that's the outline. And let's say I want the stroke to be, let's say I want it to be white. Okay, so now it's white. It's kind of hard to see. It's very thin. So another thing I can change with the stroke is the weight. So I can say stroke weight and I can make it larger. And that's just the number in pixels. Um, so if I say stroke weight is 1, it'll be 1 pixel. If I say it's 100, it'll be 100 pixels. If I say 100, it's probably just going to fill up the screen, so it'll look kind of crazy. Oh, that's actually not that bad. What if I do like 600? Yeah, so now it's just white. So I don't really want to do that. But there we go. And as I mentioned, you have to do this before you draw the shape. If I put this stuff, if I cut this and put it down here, then it doesn't get applied to the shape. Um, if I want like the stroke only to apply to my rectangle, I can move this between the circle and the rectangle. Okay, so now that stroke only gets added to the rectangle. And I can also do, if I want there to be no stroke, I can just say no stroke. Okay, and notice that the S is capitalized because it's two words, no stroke. Um, okay, so yeah, those are kind of like the basic things, and we'll go into a lot more detail with how those work next week. But we only have like 10 minutes left in class, 8 minutes left in class, so I want to give you guys a chance to just like play around with this a little bit. If you have P5 open, and if you have any little questions, and I want to talk about the assignment, which as I mentioned, is not going to be due on Monday like it says on Blackboard. We're going to move it back. Let's actually go ahead and do that right now before I forget. So this assignment, let's change the due date to next Monday. Okay, and the rest of them will change later. But if you want to get started, so it's not due until a week from Monday. So you have over a week to work on it. We don't have class on Monday, but we do have class next Wednesday, so a week from today. So if you do want to get started on the assignment, I'll show you what it is. You might be able to make a little bit of progress, even though we've just barely learned the basics. And next week we'll learn a lot more basics, and you'll be ready to actually do some work. But I'm just going to go over the assignment real quick. So the first assignment that we're going to do is kind of just like getting started. You're not going to be creating your own project. I mean, you are going to be creating your own project, but you're not going to be creating something from scratch. Um, for this project, just to get used to using some basic colors and shapes, what we are going to do is recreate an artwork. So I've linked to a few different artists here. The artists I chose, the reason I chose them is because they make art that'll be easy to recreate with P5, so using basic shapes and colors. And so if you like those, you can use one of those. If you have another artist that you want to try, that's fine as well. You could send me a link to the image that you want to recreate, and I'll take a look at it. But basically, there's a bunch of different artists that I recommend taking a look at. Uh, Kandinsky is like a, um, let's wait for this to open, an early expressionist, and his work is very geometric, lots of lines and circles and shapes and stuff like that. So if you want to go for something a little more ambitious, I would check out a Kandinsky. You can see some of his stuff has like a ton of stuff going on in it. Um, not, yeah, there's a lot of different stuff on here. So if you want to do something hard, Kandinsky is a good option. Um, this artist I really, really like, Julio Leparc, more modern artist who does stuff with shapes. So you can see all of his works use basic shapes and colors. And so it'd be some things would be hard to do, like this one, but some of them you should be easy to do in P5. Like something like this would be really easy to do. It may take some time, but would be doable. So that's another artist. Kasamir Malevich is a early 20th century Russian Soviet painter, and a lot of his works. This is like if you want to do the easiest possible. You could do black square, black circle, red square, black cross. These are very easy to do, but if you like this kind of stuff, you might want to do one of these. Agnes Martin is an artist that I really love, and her work is cool because it uses like very close colors, so it creates these kind of like interesting um, sort of optical illusions and stuff. So some of these would be easy to do with code, but you just need like a few colors and shapes and stuff. And let's see, Carmen Herrera. This one, these would be a little bit harder to do just because they're more angular. So you'd have to use like some quads and crazy stuff like that, which we'll go over next week. But they're also just like simple shapes and colors. So those are again just the artists that are recommended. They're not required to use one of those. If you have another one, just send me a link to an image and I'll take a look at it. But yeah, that's the first assignment is just to choose an artwork and then recreate it in P5. So we've seen a little bit of what we can do with P5. There's a lot more that we can do that we'll get into next week, but you can see how you would start to create those things just using some circles, some squares, and some basic colors. Okay, so I'm gonna stop recording.